All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit today, I guess, about a few kind of case studies, I guess, around curating new media. One thing, I guess, that isn't mentioned in my bio is that before I came to the Glucksman, I used to be a curator at a place called Corner House in Manchester, which was really, I guess, a new media art, contemporary art gallery. And so I'm going to show you a few examples of those today, and also probably talk about some of the issues that have come up when we look at ways of curating in physical gallery spaces or museum spaces or biennale or festival structures, works that could be termed net art, new media, or post-internet art. And there's a bit of a chronology here, I think, as well, if you look at media art histories, that when we talk about net art, it tends to be those early experiments in kind of online artworks that were made to be viewed on the internet in its very rudimentary stages. And from there on to new media art, a term that obviously Lev Manovich has talked quite a bit about, but is also a contentious one in the sense that, you know, he kind of starts that from early film experiments like Ziga Vertov's Man with a Movie Camera, but also you could even go further back to you know, some of the earlier kind of experiments even in technology, like the camera obscura. Is that a new media art? At the time it was new, or is it something that we could just call media art? And if you're calling it media art, it could be anything really. And most recently, I guess what could even be capitalized here as post-internet art, which is a very current moment in contemporary art theory and curating right now of artists who I guess are sometimes making work that is meant to be viewed online, sometimes are making physical art objects that seem like they've been kind of filtered through kind of the net technology or net context. So using, say, 3D printing, for example, or making work that kind of references the virtual world, even if it exists in the physical gallery space. I'm going to talk a little bit about all of these. But first, I just found this quote from, I guess, two people who have really, I guess, kind of written and talked extensively about new media and how you curate it. Sarah Cook and Beryl Graham, who also run a place called CRUM. I can't remember what the acronym stands for, but it's run out of the University of Sunderland in the UK. And we're real pioneers, I guess, in this idea of kind of creating a contemporary art network of curators, critics, writers, and artists. That predates, I guess, ideas certainly of, like, you know, Facebook. I mean, it was a chat room, I suppose, at one time. And this article they wrote for Art Monthly, they say, with art made for the space of the internet in particular, the major argument is still the location of viewing. As Matt Mirapol of the New York Times succinctly put it in an article titled, "Okay, it's art, but do you view it at home or in public?" Galleries and curators, let alone the public, have long struggled with Mirapol's question. Museums take seriously their remit to provide access to new forms of art, but most people don't like to sit at computers, machines they associate with information retrieval, when they're in the reflective mood that a gallery space was designed to evoke. And right away there's kind of a question there that's being raised is a gallery space actually supposed to evoke a reflective mood? I mean, that's the kind of trope or the cliche of being in a gallery, but actually when you go to galleries these days, if you go to Tate or you go to Museum of Modern Art, you find that they're actually quite active, interactive spaces. So already you're seeing maybe a shift in some kind of curatorial strategies that may be falling in line with a propensity to experience art online or experience media online. How to exhibit online art is clearly a quandary for gallery curators. One computer hooked to the net and a projector sounds easy enough, but who wants to stand in a gallery watching someone else surf a web artwork on a grand scale? Then again, it doesn't make much sense to line a wall of computers, each showing a different web artwork when the generic context for them all, the internet itself, is the same and already overly familiar to most viewers. Gallery spaces can't always sustain the level of attention, sharing, contextualization, discussion, and feedback that much net art involves, in the same way that it can accommodate simple, straightforward viewing and interpretation. So we're talking about, I guess, this translation of something that when we see a net art piece or online artwork, how do you bring it into the gallery experience? What does it gain, I guess, in the sense of kind of bringing it into that atmosphere, but also what does it lose? You know, you're losing the sense of maybe kind of, you know, its nomadic kind of qualities, or its ephemerality, I guess, in some way when you treat it as a painting or a sculpture. But also it transforms the space in some way. So it makes that space into something that isn't necessarily passive, but actually might be a space of interactivity. And so this is not an exhaustive list, but I can certainly think of examples in my own practice as a curator and of exhibitions I'm familiar with of how curators have negotiated this way of presenting or curating new media art. And so don't worry, I'll show you these names as well, but the idea of the installation as its realization of a piece of art that can only really be experienced as an installation, as a room-based work. I'll show you Charles Sanderson's work in a second. As an interactive artwork, as a theatrical tableau, as this kind of maybe ersatz kind of setup of an internet or a media space. The installation as a remake of something that already existed, as a screening program or video installation, as Sarah and Beryl talked about a little bit, just translating the screen into a film cinematic kind of setup. The computer as an artwork, and here I mean, and I've seen it many times, you walk in the galleries and essentially you've got a Mac and you sit down and you kind of play on it and you kind of realize, well, that doesn't feel right either. It might be true to its initial conception, but you have to, I think, shift the way these things are interacted with. And then also, I think what curators have come around is the combination of different models and modes. And a couple of examples that I might have a chance to talk about today are the exhibition Selective Memory that myself and Orla Murphy curated at the Glucksman back in 2014-15, I think, which is a show really about art in the archive, but actually also explored the idea of the online, the digital archive, as this kind of space, this kind of repository, I guess, of all information. As well as recently, James mentioned it, exhibition I curated in Innsbruck in Austria earlier this year, Innsbruck International, which wasn't per se a show about new media art or net art, but certainly had components of it alongside what we could see as more traditional or more conventional contemporary art. So this is a piece that I think we showed back in 2006. Obviously it's from 2001. A piece by Charles Sanderson, a Scottish artist based in Helsinki. I think he's still there anyways. Whose work, Living Rooms, is actually, I guess what you could see as the kind of physical spatial embodiment of a database. And so this is the text that ZKM have come up with it, where they say the visitors enter a darkened space in which they find themselves surrounded by words running along the walls. So you've got about, I think, from my recollection, about 8 to 10 projectors hooked up to computers here. Space is dark, these words are skimming, some of them are going quite quickly across the wall, some of them are moving quite slowly, and the vocabulary is reduced to only a few words, and this allows for the depiction of a simulation. So you see the words male and female amidst this as well. This is how it looked in the gallery space. It's a completely immersive environment. And you'd see words like male and female kind of scan across the wall. And when those two words would collide with each other in this kind of random algorithm that was following, they would produce then, according to a random number generator, 1 to 7 children, and the word child would pop up, or 7 words child would pop up, that would then move off in different directions. And as those played out in the room, the child, after I think a period of something like about half a minute, would become man, woman as well, or male, female. And then they would also kind of take off in this little trajectory as well. At certain points then, you'd also see the male, female words would change to old, and they would move much slower. And then finally would stop and would read dead, and then would disappear from the environment. Every now and then you'd see a word that would say virus that would pop up, and it would scroll through the room, and whenever it made contact with another word, that word would immediately become dead and then would disappear. So what you're seeing in this is, through quite simple kind of vocabulary of somewhere between 7 to 10 words, and this kind of microcosm of life. And that was but obviously it's something that, a work that is made to be experienced this kind of way. Its power kind of derives from the fact that you're in this environment, you're kind of surrounded by this ecosystem that's kind of playing out around you. So very different work here by Masaki Fujihata, who's kind of renowned Japanese new media artist who we did an exhibition back in 2005 at Corner House. And this is a piece called Unreflected Mirror. That was a newly commissioned work that we made for the show. And essentially, it's a virtual mirror which effectively erases the presence of the spectator, manipulating and questioning notions of identity and corporeality. So the viewer puts on a pair of glasses. When he looks in the mirror, he finds the mirror reflects only those glasses. His body disappears, so you can just see the glasses then in the mirror. And as he moves, the glasses move. So again, the way Masaki works is, it looks like a mirror, but really it's obviously a screen. The viewer is at once present and invisible, able to interact in the piece only through the effacement or erasure of his own body. And at the same time, and I forgot about this actually when we installed it, and thinking back on it, when I was looking back at a text I wrote on, there's placement of a video camera that captures and relays the image of the viewer onto a monitor behind them, which is reflected in a virtual mirror. So you are seeing yourself disappear and be made present in the same image then. This mirror screen, of course, is erasing your presence from it and keeping the glasses and following and tracking the glasses, but is actually still picking up the reflection of yourself wearing the glasses behind you. Does that make sense? It's a convoluted kind of piece, but of course what it is about affecting this moment of the uncanny, the simulation of the wearer. But it's also, I think it's important to say, with some of this work, when you're dealing with ideas of interactivity, that it's a tricky thing to show in a physical gallery or museum space, because you need someone present, you need someone there to kind of lead you through it. And that introduces a whole other element of kind of performativity, of also kind of your relationship to art. It doesn't become a reflective thing so much as you become someone kind of lining up to be the next person to wear this thing or to kind of take part in this project. Ian Breakwell, so this is a piece that was made for Channel 4 back in the 1980s, and we showed it as part of an exhibition called Broadcast Yourself, which was really about television and how artists have used television, have used broadcasting in their practices. I think what's interesting about this piece is you wouldn't really call this like a net art piece. I mean, it was made as a television work. But the way we displayed it is something that I still think is slightly problematic, in that it was originally supposed to be experienced when you would come home and you turn on Channel 4 and you would see one of these episodes of Ian Breakwell's kind of TV diary. They're kind of humorous, kind of weird, like little short films, some of which would be a half hour long, some of which would be like 5 minutes long. You wouldn't be told how long it was. You wouldn't be told half the time when it was coming on. He actually requested that pieces be broadcast after pubs closed. So he wanted this idea of people coming home and going, what's on TV, and then find this very strange program that they just couldn't read what was going on. But the way we presented was through like a facsimile of like a 1980s British kind of TV living room, which always to me has like a bit of a false ring to it, because you're very aware that so much of this work, it's effective because it surprises you, that you're caught off guard, that you're seeing something. It's a disruptive piece within this kind of stream of television viewing. And of course, no matter what elements you bring into the gallery here, you're very aware of what you're watching. It's set up in a very different way. So I always wonder if, like, thinking back, maybe there's a different way to present it where it can use the gallery in a way to catch you off guard. You know, whether it's putting a screen in the bathroom or something like that, or intermittently breaking into other film works. We had a similar piece by Stan Douglas that he made for Canadian TV back in the 90s, where he would just, buy commercial slots and then show these very strange kind of poetic short film pieces. Again, that idea of disruption, I think, is so integral to a work like that sometimes to just represent it, it makes it into something, of course it makes it into something else, but it makes it into something that's maybe too far removed from what it was supposed to be. And I think this is there's an issue with a piece like this as well, which is, I think, a very important seminal work of new media art, but one that it struggles to be encapsulated within, I think, media art histories or within a museum context. So this is Hole in Space by Kit Galloway and Sherry Rabinowitz. And in 1980, this installation was presented to pedestrians at the Lincoln Center for the Performing Arts, New York City, and to passerbys at the Broadway department store in Century City, Los Angeles. So Kit Galloway and Sherry Rabinowitz described the installation as a public communication sculpture. So essentially, you had a wall or a screen in the Center for Performing Arts with a moving image projected onto it. And then you had one just actually on a public walkway, I guess, within a shopping mall in Los Angeles, with, again, a big image of people projected onto it. And as people came across it, they thought, oh, well, look, I'm watching some sort of film that's projected quite large. And then they realized, after a little while, that, no, this was a live feed, that they could see what's happening on the other side of the States through what is now like essentially Skype. But at the time was this incredibly radical new technology. So what you see over the course of a project that ran for 4 days is it linked 2 life-size displays through a satellite feed, and at first the crowd corresponds with what initially appeared to be projected images, clearly puzzled by what was presented to them. Conversations began to begin to erupt as each viewer realized they were talking with people just like themselves at that very moment, but from a different location. It's been documented that upon the initial discovery of the installation, word spread as more people became aware of this amazing communication device that appeared to create simultaneous connection between two very distant locations. Amazing. Can you imagine? But actually, it's fascinating when you watch it. And when we showed this as essentially archival footage projected on two opposite walls, which on one level I thought was kind of interesting because you always become aware when you've got two opposite projections that you're kind of going back and forth and you're not seeing them at the same time. But at the same time, you cannot help but see this as like an archival presentation as opposed to this actual moment. And that's partly because you're watching a highly edited 4-day film piece down to what is essentially, I think, an 8-hour film. And also, I guess, because the technology has advanced so much that element of surprise, not just the fact that technology is developed, but also the way you experience it. Here it's shown in a new media gallery. When you're in a shopping mall, or even if you're going into the Center for Performing Arts in 1980, and you see a projection, a live feed of people on the other side of the country, your reaction to it is going to be so much different. It was interesting to see that in the condensation of those 4 days that towards the end you had people. I think there's one clip in there where there's a woman and her husband bring in their infant child, and they've arranged on the phone for the grandmother who lives in New York to be on the other end there so that they can show the baby, which of course it now seems so mundane and commonplace, but at that time it would have meant hopping on like a flight for 8 hours to go see your family. But I think in his presentation in this moment it does raise a lot of interesting questions about how you can be kind of true to its experience, and also the things that you're going to lose in kind of re-showing work like this. Now, I'm going to kind of breeze through this stuff here, because this was an early project I did in the as part of a Glucksman touring project back in 2011, which is essentially a screening program that I showed at different venues across Ireland, which were largely short films of artists who were using, video game technology. We're using desktop interfaces. We're using various pieces, I guess, of kind of current contemporary technology to make short films, artist films, animations. And we showed it as a screening program because, again, it felt like something that maybe you can't really necessarily bring people in and say, sit down at this computer and kind of skim through these things I've selected on YouTube. But maybe something about kind of curating YouTube clips or short films that you find on the internet can actually just be turned into a short film experience, and you can make something cinematic of it. So this was a piece, a project where we included works by Peggy Alwesh, who re-edited footage from Tomb Raider into this strange, poetic, feminist short film, to JODI's My Desktop, which is where they literally subvert and manipulate the desktop interface on their computer to make this quite extreme abstract film, to works that used slideshow technology. So in this case, using your kind of PowerPoint setup, to works that use glitches in technology to make abstract or experimental film. I know I'm rushing through all this because I do want to actually get to some other work later on here. To Oliver Laird, who we're going to come back to with the pieces he's made using kind of little clip art figures, where he would show 2,000 of these in half-second clips, and you get this quite strange animation that shows, I guess, the variety of kind of stereotypes or tropes that can be used. To Faith Denham, who used video game technology to map out, and also I think to preserve murals that were painted in kind of sectarian regions of Northern Ireland. She used this Counter-Strike first-person game for that. To Paul B. Davis, who made, used a desktop layout format to make this short film, which is also instructional film about video compression. To Conor McGarrigle, who is an Irish artist who made a series of works of BitTorrent editions, where essentially he downloads on Pirate Bay or whatever things like Mad Men or Game of Thrones, and then disrupts the download halfway through. So you get this kind of spontaneous, abstract, pixelated and glitchy version of it. And then he shows these as film works. Oh, and then finally a work by Chao Fei, prominent Chinese artist, who's actually developed this quite a large project called R&B City, where she used Second Life. You know, people actually are still on Second Life at this point, but certainly when this was made in 2009, she saw this as quite a useful tool, I guess, in her practice. And she created this R&B City, which is this kind of hybrid of New York and Beijing and futuristic worlds. And then working with various collaborators, created a whole set of films based around kind of the adventures of, you know, her avatar and other people she brought in, including other kind of, you know, quite prominent artists and curators and critics. And so, you know, the Guggenheim and Tate, I think, have actually even commissioned episodes of this as well, where they've had their own invited artists create an avatar and then engage with this particular piece. But of course, the way this was shown in Game On was just as that film. It wasn't a participatory work. So let me just skip through a couple of things here. So what I might do is I might actually send this even on to James. So if you want to have a look at some of the other stuff, because there are film clips embedded in there as well, which are certainly of interest, I think. But I do want to talk a bit about Selective Memory, which is a show that I think is interesting in the context of the Glucksman, because we don't really do shows that are medium specific. We'll take on things like photography or painting or new media art, but we don't really do a survey that represents what's happening in that specific media. But at the same time, because our shows are quite thematic, we're very happy to bring in different media within that. So Selective Memory, I think, is a good example of a show that was addressing ideas of the archive through painting, through sculpture, through film, but it was also very happy to kind of take on artworks that maybe were a bit more interactive or a bit more tech-based. And obviously a lot of this comes through working with Orla as well, and of course with Digital Arts Humanities, and kind of drawing on some of the ideas and the expertise within the department here. The kind of blurb on the show was that the archive preserves the past, its remnants and records within a repository of human knowledge. However, it also offers a space for critical engagement and creative invention, for challenging the archive's supposed objectivity with alternative histories, subversive interpretations, and speculative imaginings. Selective Memory, Artists in the Archive, explores the ways in which Irish and international artists continually return to the archive in order to imbue it with a new sense of subjectivity and individuality. And so we kind of broke it down into sub-themes around the idea of, I guess, the materials of the archive, around the notion of the digital archive, and around the way that artists can actually, I guess, fictionalize things in the past. They can take elements of the historical record and then speculate on that to kind of create something new. And it was an intriguing show as well, because some of the initial research was with the Boo Library's Special Collections, and their archivists and their conservators there. They're not conservators, what do they call them? Anyways, I met with someone there in the archives, and they said, and I was saying, oh, you must, you know, I guess you're interested in kind of conserving like these old papers and these kind of they had microfilm and these old kind of materials. And immediately they said, no, we don't care about material. We care about information transmission. So we're saving the information. The material itself, whether it's on an old piece of paper or it's on a floppy disk, means nothing to us. So I was like, okay, so now I have to do an exhibition which is about material, but you guys don't care about materials. So it kind of raises an interesting question there of like, if you're preserving information, you know, how important is the context of that information, the format of it? And these are all ideas that myself and Orla negotiated, I think, in the exhibition. So here are a couple of works that I guess are much more about a more conventional mode of archiving. Miex Van Born's Mina, Reconstruction of a Decade, and in the background you see some paintings by Lucy Mackenzie, a series called Quadlibet, which kind of take the form of these speculative, like little billboards with bits of information, little photographs attached to them, pieces of thread connecting one to the other, and yet, of course, they're not actual billboards. They're meticulously rendered paintings of these billboards. So there's trompe-l'oeil kind of style paintings. And Miex Van Born's piece, Miex is actually an archivist herself and a novelist who did research into a 19th century herbarium or plant album that she found. And she speculated upon the owner's inscribed dedication to an apparent lover, and then retraced the relationship between these two individuals through objects and text displayed in horizontal drawers and trays. So what you see here are a number of objects taken from the archive presented as this kind of 3D kind of table-like structure, but it also has very obvious gaps in the middle of it. And she talks about this idea that it's an ever-evolving piece, that as more information comes into it, the piece will actually kind of spread out, or those gaps will be filled. Anne Ramsden's Museum of the Everyday, which I think myself and Ola both found to be kind of a really nice realization of some of the archiving that usually just happens online, in the sense that this is a work that has a very much an online presence in Anne's online Flickr archive, but she actually makes posters of these as well. So she finds this material in the photographs that the artist collects on her Flickr archive, and she appropriates and combines representational codes present in advertising, the media, and museums, and in this series reframes but now everyday images as posters for imagined collections and exhibitions. So examples here include the washing dishes collection, the forgetting collection, eating a sandwich collection, and the anxiety collection. So essentially she's finding keywords for a collection of information that she just finds online, and then repurposes them, represents them as these kind of, almost like kind of posters for exhibitions. This kind of celebration of the kind of, just the everyday. But I think the fact that they're posters is actually really important as well, that a work like this, it wouldn't have that same impact if it just directed you to a Flickr page. It's about the fact that there's a selection process, but then also there's a manifestation of it as this kind of physical artwork. Jasper Rigol, Paradise Recollected. So Jasper makes films, media, art installations. I apologize for this image. This is a short film from that Paradise Recollected series, where he takes elements of educational and travel films and then edits them together to create this kind of fictional history. So, repurposing, recontextualizing extant imagery and footage. But he also has another ongoing project called the International Institute for the Conservation, Archiving, and Distribution of Other People's Memories. And actually what we did include in the show, which is out of shot here, was just like a computer, where you could actually go on and you could surf through, I think there must have been about 500 or 600 short clips that he had found in various archives and online and real footage over the years. And these are the materials that feed into his film work, but also they're there to be kind of experienced and used and adapted, so they're all open source as well. And then Marge Monko, Nora's Sisters. So we actually, and actually there's several films in here, so we decided one way, because there's a lot of film work, but we also wanted to create something that had this sense of maybe like an experience of going in somewhere and kind of watching through a number of films that address these issues. We turned one of the galleries into a kind of a cinematic space with 4 films that ran on a loop. And these include Marge Monko's Nora's Sisters, where she takes still photographs of Estonian factory workers that she found in this archive in Tallinn. And then she sets them to an excerpt from a play by Elfried Jelinek that's about revolution. So again, this is a space that's about how you can repurpose archival materials and create this new kind of fictional, speculative artwork. Danny Gao, who also did something similar by reenacting the first Israeli television broadcast in 1966. Ruth McClellan, who made a film of interviews with actual archivists in libraries. A piece called The Gatekeepers, which I think speaks of something of the idea of the archive is actually a very human place as well. Gavin Murphy, who did a piece about a researcher who delves in the history of Dublin's IMCO building. And Zbigniew Baladran, where he kind of, again, takes grainy film sequences from Soviet Czechoslovakia and then cuts over them with bits of text, but also with kind of redactive lines as well, to show not just the history kind of coming alive, but also the things that are kind of excised or cut out of history. Another work upstairs, we had a piece by Alan Phelan called Handjob, where he's collected and compiled images, materials, and paraphernalia that relates to representations of the human hand. And I think in terms of the way, because we're dealing with a whole mix of elements, materials, media, all within one particular artistic project here, we felt there was a need within the kind of space of the gallery to create something that felt slightly separate or removed from the rest of the exhibition. It's quite a bitty exhibition anyways, I think because of the nature of the work. So we kind of painted out and carpeted like a little quadrant within the gallery. So it felt like you were walking into this almost kind of invisible black room gallery space. And again, it kind of shows, like a lot of the work here, it's a piece that is still evolving. It actually happened when he broke his thumb and then was at home, and he often works as a sculptor, and he couldn't really work in the same way, so he just started surfing online and thinking about his thumb and then collecting these images of hands, which is now incorporated like weird little sculptures of hands, like braille texts, books, video. It's quite a large and quite a weird arbitrary archive that he's running. And then we often, I think I mentioned this before, about this idea of the museum space becoming something that isn't necessarily a passive, reflective space, but something that encourages, I guess, a kind of engagement or a realization of the ideas through participation. And what we decided to do for this show was a piece called, or a place called The Secret Archive, which is not an art project, unless you consider the curators to be artists, which we don't, but a way to, I guess, for people to kind of, to give something or contribute to the exhibition, and also to maybe kind of work through some of the ideas explored in the artistic practice. And so what we've got here is the secret archive, where we say, have you got a secret? Why not write it down and add it to our secret archive? All contributions are anonymous, so you don't need to include your name. Just pick the category that best describes your secret and add your note to the cabinet. See the cabinet's over there on the side, right? You can read what others have written, but only for the duration of the exhibition, as at the end of the show, the archive will be destroyed and all the secrets will disappear. Which was like a hugely popular moment within the exhibition, because I think it's like a confession style kind of thing that people have this urge to share, but also we kind of label the boxes. So you had things like want or work or friends, but then on the top you also had like fantasy or I think there was one that was called something like sex even, and so you had people putting in like really private messages as well. And of course also the weird thing is you could sit down and read them, so sometimes you go up there and people would be sat down and just be reading you all these secrets as well. And we did destroy them at the end, but we also read through them all at the end. I think there was also, it kind of created like a bit of a commotion. I think like the Echo even, or the Examiner were like, oh, we'll do a feature on it. And they're saying, well, can we reprint some of the secrets? I was like, no, you can't reprint it. Like, obviously that then becomes a very different thing from someone privately sitting down reading it. If it's in the newspaper, then the archive isn't disappearing. It's staying on. So like you can talk about it, but you can't be specific about what the actual secrets are. Although we did track down one of our staff members who put a secret in and did a bit of investigative work. So that was a show, I guess, that very much looked at some ideas around kind of the archive and how those things can be manifested both in new media works and net.art works, but also in like old-fashioned kind of paintings and sculptures and a kind of a mix of things, and which I think is kind of the way we would generally tend to work, and certainly the way that the exhibition in Innsbruck that I did in March earlier this year was working. This was a show, so Innsbruck International is a relatively new biennial of contemporary art. It's right in kind of the Alps in Austria, so Innsbruck is a relatively small town as well, or small city. And invites national and international artists to work on socially and historically significant space around the city of Innsbruck. Exhibitions, performances, theater pieces, workshops, film screenings, curated music program, discursive formats, forming a multifaceted festival that deals with topics and issues of today's world. And in this case, it was the idea of agents of social change. So we were looking at the issue of how emotion and common language can arise from a putative personal proximity, which tips into a withdrawn, unfamiliar emptiness, and how this impacts relationships with others and the world around us. In this context, the biennial developed special dialogues between artist pieces and the public, private and historical, as well as contemporary spaces and locations. Anyways, yes, I'm not going to read all that because, like most of these art things, it kind of uses very kind of open language. But the best way to experience is to actually look at some of the work. So Adi Wagenknecht, who is an artist actually from Innsbruck but based in New York, with her piece Asymmetric Love, which is this chandelier that she made out of CCTV cameras that are connected to a bank of monitors as well. And a new work that we commissioned for the show by her called the Saint Tinder, which is an installation which was a shrine for mobile phones and a memorial to the outdated, obsolete devices that are discarded with every impending upgrade. So again, this is what we call, when we talk about like post-internet post-internet art, where you're often seeing artists who are using modes of painting or sculpture, photography or film, media that is very much established as not internet art, but using it as a way to reflect on the fact that the internet is not just a medium, but is actually kind of a wider historical and contemporary context. That's what Addie does as well. I think that her work a lot of times addresses these issues without specifically relying on them. The phones are arrayed in tiers like relics of departed loved ones, preserved amidst various keepsakes and votive offerings. And again, there's a transformative leap here in the relationship between user and phone that at the same time feels wholly inevitable. As the device is always at hand, immediately available, one's attachment to it is normalized. And such dependency in time can even lead to a strong emotional investment, to love, or when the battery diminishes or the screen shatters, to a sense of devastating loss. And there's a detail, it's tragic. I've got like several of these in my house. Melanie Benayo, again a Dutch artist based in the States, with a film piece, part of a trilogy called Night Soil, and this one's Fake Paradise, which is about ideas of technology and the internet as these kind of spaces for kind of performing your identity, for kind of projecting kind of a persona, but also then she ties it back to people who are taking ayahuasca to have these transcendental experiences in the Amazon. So you have a lot of footage of these people playing with their phones while they're also hallucinating on this quite strong psychedelic drug. And it weirdly works. Now, I showed that whole film to an art history class last year, and I think I realized about halfway through, like, oh, this is way too much to be showing them, because it's an unbelievably intense and quite shocking film. So I decided to spare you today. But Google it and watch it, because you can see it online, of course. Which is also, I think, something worth saying, that it's interesting that nowadays a lot of artists use film and video in their practices anyways. But I think there was a period where they were unwilling to put those things online. Because they're saying like, oh no, this is an artwork and you don't just distribute it in this kind of way. Whereas I don't know many artists who feel that way anymore. I think they're all very happy to disseminate these things and not worry about how that affects them commercially, or whether it kind of leads to some sort of sense of a loss of aura or specialness about seeing it in the gallery. They seem to be happy to have work that's installed in an art gallery, but also could just be seen on someone's phone. And I think there's still a lot of work to be done on this. I wonder how that affects the aesthetics of some of these artists as well when they're thinking about the different kind of media, the kind of way their content is distributed. So Oliver Lark, so I showed you a little earlier work his before, which is his 2000 clip arts. This is a very different kind of a project in that he's making replications of famous Viennese sculptures using 3D printing technology. And also I want to show you this, because how's that for like a place to show contemporary art? Innsbruck does have some nice venues. So they let us use this ancient, like this old palace from the Habsburgs, I guess it was, to show work that ostensibly looks like it belongs there, classical, like neoclassical sculptures. But actually you can see the back kind of flattens out there, so they're kind of hollow on the back. So as you walk around them, you can actually see all the recesses and cavities of these works. Isn't that nice? The Glucksman's nice, but we don't have that. And then a work by Marge Monko, who again I showed earlier. She did that film about the Estonian factory workers and kind of repurposing that stuff. And this is a more recent piece called Dear D, which really comes out of this, like Melanie Benayo's work, is I think something about that idea of emotional connection, or kind of personal connection, and how that gets filtered through technology. So a couple of things that I think maybe are worth mentioning. First of all, I think it's really interesting to see that earlier when I talked about Marge Monko's practice, she was using old black and white photographs of factory workers and repurposing them to kind of create this new fictional narrative. And her practice hasn't really changed that much here, except now she's working from a much vaster kind of repertoire, I guess, of I don't know what this is, of possible images. So her practice still is based on this idea, I guess, of kind of culling through available information and finding a way to structure it to create something that is actually, if not a fictional take on something, that's something that feels or uses the language of like a deeply personal love letter. The other thing I think is just to show you right here. When we talk about ideas of how you present or you display a work like that, so what I decided to do in Innsbruck was to find a very small, dark room. Because immediately it's a piece that speaks of, I guess, intimacy, but also a one-on-one connection. So that when you go into this room, you're confronted with a screen, and there's not really room for more than 2 people at most, but it really does feel like a space that's quite isolated and kind of shut off from the wider kind of context. I mean, very different from something like Nolly Benayo, where we would have had a couch right here, so you can kind of linger and kind of watch the film. It's a longer film anyways, but it has this kind of sense of, you kind of surrender yourself to this quite trippy film with like potted plants and everything around you. And here we have a work that I guess you kind of give yourself over to it. You kind of submit to this encounter. And so I guess that's a little bit of what I mean when I kind of speak about this idea of the way you present work, even works like this that we can just as easily watch on like a Vimeo channel. You can use it in a way to create something that maybe has a different register to it, but it also can reinforce some of the ideas that are actually within the work itself. Does that make sense? So that's it. So if you have any questions, I think I've got a bit of time here, so fire away.